Talking about the difficulties between countries, between and within countries, early 20th century, World War I. Hindemith and his Gebrauchsmusik, useful music for good amateurs to play. The fact that the Depression was worldwide, and because life was hard, money was tight, jobs were scarce, this had a real effect on music making for a while. And before that, we had been talking about the utilization of folk music, folk rhythms, folk melodies in the art music of major composers. The emphasis on folk sources continued with the composer Bartók. Bartók, B-A-R-T-O-K, was a composer, a performer, and a researcher. He was sort of the first professional ethnomusicologist, so to speak. He traveled widely around Central Europe and Eastern Europe. He collected a lot of folk melodies, not only to transcribe them into something readable if it seemed to not quite fit the scale bases we were talking about for publication, but also for analysis. And he developed a style which is rather peculiar to him that fused folk elements with the sophisticated techniques of 20th century art music. He was also something of a teacher, and as a matter of fact, he composed a set of 153 piano pieces spread over 6 books. They're of graded difficulty. They get harder and harder as they climb in the numbers. He developed these as a teaching tool. Each of the 153 pieces has its own little technical problem, so that it's music for people to practice technique on. The title of this is Mikrokosmos. And these are, in fact, all in 2 parts. So it's 1 part for one hand and 1 part for the other hand. And you can practice all kinds of finger difficulties with these little pieces. They're each maybe a page, usually, not much more than that. 153 of them in 6 books. Now, anybody ever done a piece by Bartók? 2? Maybe? 1, maybe 2, okay. Bartók is a major composer of the 20th century. A name that's well known, but we don't do his music as much as we could and should, because it's difficult on the performers, not undoable by any stretch, but difficult. And because we have kind of capitulated to the wants, needs, and desires of audiences, it's still a little bit difficult for audiences as well. But in spite of all that, a very, very major and influential composer. So let's make a list of Bartók style characteristics. So let's start out by saying dissonant, because it is. Often percussive, extremely contrapuntal, and we mean he uses canon and fugue and other types of imitation. Melodic influence from Eastern European folk music. motor rhythms. Irregular meters. Irregular accents. Strong formal design. Bartók's another fanatic about form. Parallel movement in chord streams. What did we call that the other day in Debussy?
Planing?
Planing, right. Although with Debussy, it's usually chords that you can really identify as a chord that you know. In Bartók, it may not be something that you know. It may be something that he's put together, but they still just move parallel, all the voices parallel in streams. Exotic scale bases, of which we could name pentatonic, whole tone, modal, irregular, and let's just call it gapped. So that would be a scale that's not all stepwise, but has a skip, or two even, in the middle of it. Scales with gaps in them. Non-triadic sonorities. What would those be? Well, maybe quartal chords, chords that are built in fourths. Quintal chords, chords that are built in fifths. Something that's not triadic. Triadic means it's built in thirds. So non-triadic sonorities. The addition of major seconds and minor seconds to chords. So in other words, it might be a chord that you know, but it's got extra notes stuck onto it. Extra major seconds and minor seconds stuck onto chords. The use of tone clusters. What is a tone cluster? A group of adjacent notes. That's right.
Would those be considered like nines in the chord? Like a nine?
No, they're intended to be clashes. They're intended to be dissonances, yeah. So usually if it's truly a ninth or an 11th chord or something like that, that the highest part of the chord is up somewhere, and you have the highest notes at the top, and usually a gap, and then one or two low notes at the bottom. Here, they're just all in there together so that they make dissonant sounds.
So, Dr. Munn, are any of those like a cluster, like a chord? Does that have to be some of them that have to be consonants on the outside of the chord, or is it just?
No, not necessarily. It would just be at least three adjacent notes together, but maybe more. Yeah. So if you went to the piano and you went like that, that would qualify as a tone cluster, okay? Because they're notes that are side by side, not stuff that you stack in thirds, but a group of adjacent notes. The music, we say, is on a key, not in a key. The use of polytonality. What would you think polytonality is? Yeah, more than one key at the same time. He tends to use, and this is even in instrumental music, what we refer to as a parlando style. When we say parlando, we mean that it's like speaking. So it's not necessarily in a regular beat or regular rhythm. And Also, when we say parlando, we don't mean like in English. We mean like in Hungarian. Right? So it has a sort of a spoken quality to it, even if it's an orchestra piece. There are passages in what we refer to as a parlando style. And finally, the use of palindromes. You know what a palindrome is? It's something that reads the same forwards and back. Okay? So if you had the word kayak, all right, that's the same whether you read it from left to right or right to left. Race car is another. Okay. Wow. There would be a longer one. A palindrome. All right. Well, so as it comes to notes, then we're talking about a series of pitches that progresses, and at some point then, as the music continues, the pitches are in reverse order of what they just were. Right? No, I think it's independent of that. Now you can also do this with rhythm as well. You can have a rhythmic succession and then do that rhythmic succession in reverse order as well. It doesn't have to be pitch. It could be rhythm as well. All right, so he likes palindromic structures. He likes things that are mirrors. He likes things that are symmetrical. Also, have you ever heard of the golden mean or the golden section? What's that?
Generally about 2/3 of the way into the piece. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, generally about 2/3 of the way. It's like the ultimate climax of the piece, generally.
Okay, and that actually we find is built into a great many things in the universe, including, for example, the human body. That if you took the length of the arm, that this part here would be a little bit less than this part here. And so this part here is about 62%, and this part's about 38%. That's the golden section, the golden mean. And you can measure other things in the body the same way. You can measure a lot of stuff. So in a movement of music, about that far through the piece, something special happens. Okay. And maybe not every piece by Bartók, but a bunch of it. Enough that analysts have discovered that it's really predictable in a piece by Bartók. Okay. So when we say strong formal design, that's one of the types of things that we mean. Yes.
Bartók kind of like a neoclassical composer.
I don't know if I'd call him neoclassical, although there would certainly be traces in it. Now, remembering that the hard economic times that hit many countries associated with World War I, and then after that with the Great Depression, this really cut down on the size and length of a lot of things, including in music. So composers are, in a way, forced into some neoclassical characteristics because there's just not enough money to carry on the way it was with Mahler and Strauss anymore, because it would just never be done. And in the 20th century, composers are really kind of expecting now that they're likely to get a performance of something that they have written for a special occasion or for somebody. So, if it's going to cost them too much, it'll just never be done. This is kind of why we don't seem to have the Berlioz Requiem anymore. You'd almost have to have it in the Mackay Stadium, and it would just be prohibitively expensive. Not to mention that we don't have performance halls that can accommodate it in this country very well. All right, one of the really important pieces by Bartók is entitled Music for Strings, Percussion, and Celeste. It is a piece for orchestra, of course, plus celeste. And it has some traditional things about it. For example, it's in 4 movements. We're pretty much accustomed to that in symphonic type works. But there's some unusual characteristics also. The tonality in the first movement goes from A to D sharp. What's that relationship? Tritone. He loves tritones. The second movement starts in C and ends in F sharp, and that is also a tritone. Right. The third movement is like it's going to go in reverse order. It starts in F sharp and ends in C. And the final movement does what the first movement does, starts in A and ends in D sharp. Notice that C and F sharp are both equidistant from A. Okay? So this is part of his sort of fanaticism about structural relationships. We note that they're all tritones also. And we notice that the outer movements match each other and the inner movements match each other in those tonalities. So you've got, in order, A, C, D sharp, F sharp, all equidistant from each other. In the Adagio movement, there is, in fact, a mirror. And unfortunately, you don't have volume 3 of the anthology, so maybe I'll bring you a photocopy of just the first page of that movement so that you can see how it works. But it opens with xylophone. And the xylophone plays alone for a few measures in a particular rhythm. And then at the end, that rhythm by the xylophone is going to be played in reverse order. So a palindrome there. Also in the middle of the movement, there are 2 measures which are then done again in reverse order right after that. Okay, so another mirror, another retrograde, another palindrome. The form of that movement, by the way, A, B, C, D, C, B, A. You have to write it to appreciate it. A, B, C, D, C, B, A. All right, can you see that the outer A's match, and then you move inward from both ends to the B and the C, and then the D is the one in the middle? Okay, so that's the form of that movement. When we say strong formal design, this is sort of the kind of thing that we are speaking about. In that case, symmetrical. Other significant works, 3 piano concertos, 6 string quartets. We've had sets of 6 with Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven. The pattern of having a group of 6 goes into the 20th century here with Bartók. 2 violin concertos. A piece called Concerto for Orchestra. So in that one, there is no featured soloist. Lots of instruments in the orchestra have solo passages. So Concerto for Orchestra. An opera called Duke Bluebeard's Castle. piece called The Miraculous Mandarin. Another piece for orchestra called Dance Suite. There would be others, but those are well known. The composer Kodály, K-O-D-A-L-Y, Kodály, is a little bit less important than Bartók as a composer, but probably more important than Bartók as an educator. He also tends to use more archaic elements in his compositions. There would be things like allusion to plain chant, for example, other allusions to Renaissance and Baroque techniques. His most pervasive influence, of course, has been in music education, and that's where we get the movable do system and the hand signs that we teach in school, and hopefully here in theory as well. This system has been adopted in many, many countries. The German counterpart to Kodály is Orff, Karl Orff, O-R-F-F. He also developed an educational method, also based upon folk music and folk instruments. It has been widely adopted as well. Since we're in the 20th century now, let's, for the time being, return to the Russian composers. They are now Soviet composers. First, Prokofiev, P-R-O-K-O-F-I-E-V, Prokofiev. He's basically a rather conservative composer. He's interested mostly in good melody, and this is certainly evident in his most famous works. Peter and the Wolf, for example, symphonic fairy tale, Peter and the Wolf. He also composed a ballet called Romeo and Juliet. There is a symphonic suite called Lieutenant Kiji, K-I-J-E. My roommate in college was convinced that the group Blood, Sweat, and Tears liked to use themes from Lieutenant Kiji. A cantata called Alexander Nevsky, N-E-V-S-K-Y, Alexander Nevsky. And his Symphony Number 1 is nicknamed the Classical Symphony. The Classical Symphony. And it's pretty tame. It's got very attractive melodies and not very much dissonance in it. The Soviet authorities hated him. They charged him with formalism. Like that's a bad thing. Well, what's that? Well, it's basically that he wrote music that did not celebrate the socialist revolution and the glorification of the working class. He admitted it. He said, I'm not a Soviet nationalist. I'm just a composer. Another important Soviet, Shostakovich, S-H-O-S-T-A-K-O-V-I-C-H. And by the way, Shostakovich didn't die until 1985, not that long ago. Shostakovich is important mostly for 15 symphonies. Some of them seem to capitulate to the Soviet censors and others do not. When they did, they applauded him, and when they didn't, they threatened him. It was one or the other. And so basically, he would say, "Oh dear, I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again." And then eventually he would, and they would threaten him, and he would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again," and so on and so on and so on. The Soviets exercised a lot of censorship and control over music, really until the 1980s. During the Reagan administration, when the United States military and economic strength basically broke the Soviet system financially, and that's when Gorbachev sort of saw it coming and decided we better have glasnost and make friends, otherwise it was going to go badly for them, and he was right. He didn't want to self-destruct. A good thing. Well, as a result of glasnost, Russian and Western composers have gotten to know each other again, because they were pretty much isolated from us. So they get to know each other's works and styles, and been really, really difficult and inaccessible before. When I was in graduate school the second time, I was talking with one of my major professors about getting access to some things. And he said, well, officially you can't, because they're not allowed to. He said, but if you can have some kind of low-level contact and ask for something and they can't accept real payment or anything, because they'd go to jail for that. But if you offered to do something for them, then maybe you could work a deal. So what kind of a deal are we talking about? I said, well, they might be able to make you some microfiche of something if maybe you could trade them a book that they're not allowed to have and cannot get. Maybe something sort of more under the table like that. That might be possible. So it was basically just frozen for quite a long time. And now we don't have that anymore. Now things are more accessible. There are a lot of things we're still discovering also, which are not especially happy, but are coming out. We had mentioned England, starting an English Renaissance under Elgar. Well, in the early 20th century, the foremost composer was Vaughan Williams for them. And this is not hyphenated. It's just a double name. Vaughan Williams. He lived until 1958. Vaughan Williams composed a lot of music, a lot of vocal and choral music, a bunch of operas, 9 symphonies. There's that number 9 again. Okay. He was also quite an expert on hymnology, church hymns. Did a lot of research in that regard. He edited the New English Hymnal, which is still used today. Vaughan Williams drew his influence from older masters, English composers like Thomas Tallis from the Renaissance, Henry Purcell from the Baroque, also Bach and Handel, Ravel and Debussy. He's very eclectic in his choices. The symphonies of Vaughan Williams are especially important works for him. Number 1 is entitled the Sea Symphony, S-E-A, sea, like the ocean, the Sea Symphony. It is full orchestra, chorus, and soloists. We did this, Dr. Dabrowski's first year here with the symphony. It almost killed us. He has one called the London Symphony. It is slightly programmatic about London, but there's nothing in it that's specific. He has one called the Pastoral Symphony. Yes, number 6 for Beethoven is also called the Pastoral Symphony. Another one is called Sinfonia Antarctica. Basically, that celebrates heroism and human struggle against the overwhelming forces of nature. Pretty hard to live in Antarctica, for example. All right, so Vaughan Williams is early 20th century. Middle 20th century, Benjamin Britten, B-R-I-T-T-E-N, lives until 1976. Most important works for Britten: the Requiem, an opera called Peter Grimes, a piece for mixed chorus and harp, which a couple of you know, The Ceremony of Carols. Did it just last year. And besides Britten, the two other composers of greatest note for England, Gustav Holst, H-O-L-S-T, and William Walton, W-A-L-T-O-N. In Germany, the Nazis exercised so much control in a nationalistic sense. They ruined almost everything they touched. Musically, they drove their best composers away to other countries. One of their best was Hindemith. A truly major composer whose works aren't done very much in this country. They're pretty difficult. Hindemith lived till 1963. He was, in addition to being an important composer, an important teacher and theorist. Hindemith came to this country, taught at Yale after he escaped the Nazis. He authored a book which is entitled The Craft of Musical Composition. The Craft of Musical Composition. This sets forth a method of composing and a method of musical analysis. Now, one of the things that he sets forth is that a composition starts at a point of consonance and then progresses to a point of greatest dissonance and then gradually goes back at the very end to a state of consonance. He also developed a system, a hierarchy of consonant and dissonant intervals. What would be the most consonant interval? Perfect unison. Then perfect octave. Then perfect fifth, right? You're getting it, okay. And so on to the thirds and the sixth, major and minor, finally to the seconds, major and minor, and sevenths, major and minor. And then finally, by definition, his definition, the most dissonant intervals, the tritone. So there's a hierarchy of intervals. Now, in a piece by Hindemith, you might have a chord, or shall we just call it a sonority, that has lots of notes in it. So you can actually figure out the root of a very dissonant chord by finding the most consonant interval between any two notes sounding. And whatever that most consonant interval is, the bottom note is by definition the root. Okay, so it could be horrendously dissonant, but by going looking for the most consonant interval between any two notes, whatever they are, wherever they are, they don't have to be down low even. Whatever that is, then by definition, the lower of the two notes of that most consonant interval is the root. Hindemith played the viola, plus a number of other instruments. He noticed that there was not a lot of real literature for the viola. So he set out to compose some music for the viola and for some other instruments that didn't have very much, and they needed some. Well, this is kind of in keeping with his contributions to Gebrauchsmusik, useful music. And in keeping with this, a fair amount of his music is composed for teaching purposes. Well, a good example of something like that is a collection of piano pieces entitled Ludus Tonalis. If you ever go to some high-powered school to have a degree in theory, graduate degree in theory, you'll probably be analyzing something from Ludus Tonalis before you're done. All right, what's Ludus Tonalis? It is a set of 12 fugues, one in each key, plus a prelude, the tonality of which goes from C to F sharp, and a postlude, the tonalities of which start on F sharp and go to C. All right, this is a modern counterpart of the well-tempered clavier. 12 fugues, one in each key. Okay, yep. I mean, they're dissonant. You have to take them in Hindemith's system. Although the spectrum of compositions for Hindemith is pretty wide, he's got some of them that truly sound neo-romantic, and you've got others that are really stern, severe dissonance as well, and all shades in between. He was a true genius, tremendously important figure in the 20th century, and his music isn't performed as much as it should be because it's hard. It's actually quite difficult. We already mentioned Orff, a German, and his educational method. The musical works of Orff are pretty simple in their conception. They're not difficult to understand. Most famous piece? Carmina Burana. That's right. There are some performance complexities, but it's not hard to understand at all. Another German composer who manages to endure, it's on a lower level than these others, I think, is Kurt Weill. W-E-I-L-L, Kurt Weill. He lived only from 1900 to 1950. He started out as an opera composer in Germany when the Nazis attacked him and called his works decadent. He fled first to Paris, then to the United States. And in the United States, he developed a second career as a Broadway composer. His goal was never to entertain the elite, but always to entertain the common folk. I was astonished one time to find out that he has practically a cult following in this country, and that there is a Kurt Weill newsletter that comes out regularly and identifies the works of Weill that are being performed in various places, and all of the information about when and where and how much it costs and stuff like that, so that the cult can go hear performances of works by Kurt Weill. Probably his most famous piece is an opera called The Rise and Fall of the City of Mahogany. It's a title you should know, The Rise and Fall of the City of Mahogany. It does have orchestra. It's an opera, has orchestra. But it also has some unusual instruments, including saxophone, including zither, Z-I-T-H-E-R. Know what a zither is? No. Well, it's the kind of thing you use in elementary school usually. And you press a few things to identify some strings, then you have a pick and you go zoom across the strings like that. You've probably seen one and just not thought about what it was. Accordion. Don't usually find that in an orchestra. Bass guitar. By the way, we say accordion. We don't mean these little toys, that people play around here. We mean the 120 bass, full keyboard, stops where you can set different tones, like it were organ or something like that. Accordion. So kind of unusual, but not aimed at the elite, as we say. Mahogany, the opera, is about a bunch of fugitives. They escape. They go off. They build a town all of their own that has no laws. It's a town dedicated completely to pleasure. Whatever you want. Well, as you can imagine, things go sour, and he really meant it at the time, since it was in Germany, to be an attack on the failures of capitalism. Another famous work of his is called the Threepenny Opera. This is during a time when the American hit parade was kind of the rage in Europe and many other countries as well. And Weill parodies the style of the hit parade because he felt it would be appealing to a lot of people. He married a singer named Lotte Lenya. I think there's a picture of her, actually, in the textbook somewhere. You might check that out. She performed a lot of his works, and after he died, she kept performing them in a great many places to sort of champion his works. We can mention in the 20th century, Latin America, a couple of really major composers. One of them would be Villa-Lobos, that's hyphenated, Villa-Lobos, from Brazil. And Ginastera with a G, Ginastera, from Argentina. And then maybe at a lower level than that, Carlos Chavez from Mexico. They can all be classified as nationalist composers because they make heavy use of their own national musical elements. Guess that's kind of our time. We better quit here. So, written exam number 3 on Monday. Okay? See you then.
That's done it too.